Have you ever been laughed at by the person you loved the most? In front of everyone who already thought you were nothing? Because that kind of laughter doesn't just embarrass you. It rewrites the way you see your entire life. That night, under chandeliers worth more than most people's homes, I learned exactly how invisible I had become in my own marriage. It started like any other corporate dinner. Polished smiles, crystal glasses, men in tailored suits pretending they were relaxed while silently competing with one another. The kind of room where power hums under the surface, where everyone measures their worth by titles, bonuses, and proximity to the right people. My wife, Emily, belonged there. She moved through the room like she owned it. Confident, admired, desired. She was a rising star at Atlas Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing companies in the city. People leaned in when she spoke. They laughed a little too hard at her jokes. They remembered her name. I stood on the edges of that world, holding a glass of whiskey I barely tasted, watching her shine. To them, I was just her husband. No title, no role, no relevancia. And for years, I had let them believe that was all I was. I had stepped away from the spotlight long ago, chosen a quieter life, one without ego or headlines. I told myself it was humility. I told myself it was love. I told myself it didn't matter what people thought. But standing there that night, watching my wife laugh with men who didn't know me, I felt something crack. A voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "Jack, get over here." Chad Wilson, Emily's coworker, loud, confident. The kind of man who thrived on attention and believed the room belonged to him by default. He waved me over with a grin that had never known consequence. I walked toward them calmly, Emily slipping her arm through mine like an accessory she'd brought along. Richard Hayes, the CEO of Atlas Dynamics, stood beside Chad, immaculate suit. Polite smile, a man who looked powerful because he had never been questioned. Chad raised his glass. "So tell me," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "what's it like being married to the company's golden girl?" A few chuckles. Emily smiled. "What's it like?" Chad continued, swirling his champagne. "Having your wife pay all the bills?" Laughter spread wider this time. I waited. Surely she would say something. Surely she would step in. She laughed. Not nervously. Not awkwardly. She laughed like it was harmless fun. Something inside me went cold. Chad leaned closer. "I mean seriously, Jack, what do you even do all day? Netflix, video games." More laughter. I looked at Emily. She didn't meet my eyes. Then Chad delivered the line that changed everything. "So tell me, how does it feel, being a loser living off your wife?" The laughter exploded, and in that moment, 15 years collapsed into a single breath. 15 years of silence. 15 years of letting assumptions live. 15 years of choosing peace over truth. I could have smiled. I could have excused myself. I could have stayed small. Instead, I stood up. Slowly, I adjusted my tie, straightened my jacket, and looked directly at Richard Hayes. "You have 24 hours to enjoy your position," I said calmly, my voice steady, "because this loser is the one who will be signing your termination papers." The room died. No laughter, no music, no clinking glasses. Just silence. Richard's face drained of color. Emily's hand slipped from my arm. Chad's grin collapsed into confusion. In that stillness, I realized something important. The most dangerous man in the room is not the loudest. It's the one everyone underestimated. And, tonight, they were about to learn who I really was. Emily followed me out of the ballroom like she was chasing a runaway reality. Her heels struck the marble floor in fast, sharp clicks. The sound echoed through the hotel lobby, bouncing off polished columns and glass walls, turning heads as people looked up from their phones and luggage carts. "Jack," she called again. Louder. "Jack, wait." I didn't stop, not because I wanted to punish her, not because I wanted to make a scene, but because if I turned around too soon, I would say something I could never take back. The revolving doors were 10 steps away when her hand clamped onto my arm and yanked me to a half-stop. "Stop. Just stop." Her voice shook. What the hell was that? I stared at her hand on my sleeve like it belonged to someone else, like it didn't have the right to touch me after what just happened. She realized it too and let go, but not fully. Her fingers hovered in the air, trembling. "What do you mean you own 90% of Atlas?" she demanded. "Are you insane? Are you trying to humiliate me?" I exhaled slowly, like I was letting the ballroom's poison leave my lungs. "You think this is about humiliating you?" I said quietly, "and that's exactly the problem." Her eyes flashed. "Don't do that. Don't turn it on me. You just stood up in front of my CEO and threatened him like you re some kind of owner." I finished. She opened her mouth, then closed it, like the word didn't fit her image of me. "You can't be," she said, voice low now, uncertain. "You haven't had a job in years." There it was. Unemployed. The label the entire room had pinned onto me, and apparently the one she had accepted. I tilted my head. "Is that what you tell people?" Emily's throat bobbed. I don't know what I tell them. You're always home. You're always, around." "Around," I repeated. "Like furniture." "That's not what I meant." "Then, what did you mean?" I asked, and my voice stayed calm only because I'd spent 15 years practicing calm. "Because when Chad called me a loser, you laughed. When he said you pay my bills, you laughed. When he asked what I do all day, you laughed." Her eyes glistened. "It was awkward. It was disrespect," I corrected. Her face hardened again, defense rising like armor. "So you decided to blow up my entire life because you were hurt?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I didn't blow up your life, Emily," I said. "I stopped letting you build it on a lie." She stared at me, breathing fast. "What lie?" she whispered. I studied her. The perfect makeup, the flawless hair, the emerald gown, the woman who looked like she belonged in a room full of executives, and yet she looked like she was seeing a ghost. "You don't know who you married," I said. Her jaw tightened. "I know exactly who I married." "Then tell me," I said, quiet but sharp. "Who am I?" She blinked. Her lips parted, but nothing came out, because she didn't know. Not really. She knew the version of me she presented to people, the version that made sense in her world. Retired early, quiet husband, supportive background character, a man who had stepped out of the race, who had no ambition, no edge, a man safe enough to stand next to her success without threatening it. But that wasn't the full story. Not even close. "I'm going home," I said, turning slightly. Emily grabbed my wrist again. Desperation replacing anger. "No, you can't just walk away. Explain." I held her gaze. "You want the explanation?" I asked. "Fine." We stood there, in the hotel lobby, while strangers drifted past us like we were part of the decor. The city glowed through glass doors. Outside, traffic moved, indifferent to the fact that my marriage was splitting down the middle. 15 years ago, I began, there was a company called Orion Systems. Emily's expression shifted. The name sounded familiar, like a distant memory she never cared to examine. "You remember the merger," I continued. "Orion merged into Atlas Dynamics." She swallowed. "Atlas bought Orion." "No," I said. "Atlas didn't buy Orion. Atlas begged Orion to save it." Her eyebrows pulled together. "Atlas was dying," I continued. Bankruptcy was on the table. Richard Hayes was not the confident CEO you see today. He was desperate. He came to me because Orion was the only tech company in the space with the leverage to keep Atlas alive. Emily's eyes narrowed. "You knew Richard?" I laughed once, short and humorless. "I didn't just know him," I said. "I built the deal that gave him his career." Her lips parted. "That's impossible." "It's inconvenient," I corrected. "For the story you've been telling yourself. The silence stretched. Emily's voice came out small. Then, why? Why didn't you ever tell me? I held her gaze, and the answer was simple, but it wasn't soft. Because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing, I said. And now I do. Her face tightened, guilt flashing across it so fast she couldn't hide it. That's not fair, she whispered. Neither is laughing while your husband gets humiliated, I replied. Emily's breathing shook. I didn't mean it. You did it, I said. That landed harder than any insult Chad had thrown. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry yet. Not fully. She was still fighting for her pride. So you really own 90%? She asked, like she needed to hear it again in order to believe it. I nodded. And Richard Hayes. She swallowed. He knows. He knows exactly who I am, I said. He just didn't think I'd ever step out of the shadows. And Chad? All of them. Emily looked back toward the ballroom doors, like she could still hear the laughter. They're going to talk, I finished. Whisper. Speculate. Pretend they always respected me. Act like it was a funny misunderstanding. Emily's voice cracked. This will destroy my reputation. I looked at her for a long second. And what about mine? I asked. That question finally broke the armor. Emily's shoulders sagged. Her eyes blinked rapidly, tears finally spilling over. I didn't know, she whispered again. But this time it sounded like an apology and a confession at the same time. You didn't want to know, I said, and my voice wasn't cruel. It was tired, because the truth would have made you uncomfortable. It would have forced you to see me as something other than what fit into your narrative. Emily covered her mouth with her hand, shaking. What happens now? She asked. I stared at her. Now, I said, you get to live with the consequences of your laughter. I turned again, and this time she didn't grab me. But she followed, not with anger, not with control, with fear. The kind of fear a person feels when the ground they built their life on suddenly reveals it was never solid. I drove home alone. I didn't even realize how tight my hands were on the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The city lights blurred at the edges of my vision. Not because I was crying. I wasn't. Because something in me had finally decided it was done begging for respect. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Clean, quiet, perfect from the outside. But inside, I knew something had changed permanently. I walked straight to my office. Emily called it my little room, like it was a hobby corner. She didn't know it was the only place in the house that still belonged to the real me. I shut the door behind me and stared at the bookshelf against the far wall. Most people would see books, photos, a few souvenirs from vacations, but my fingers found the hidden latch without hesitation. A soft click. The shelf shifted. A panel swung open. Behind it was a fireproof safe embedded into the wall. I entered the code. The safe opened with a slow, heavy breath, like a vault acknowledging its owner. Inside was a thick folder, worn at the edges, labeled in plain letters, Atlas Holdings. I pulled it out and spread the documents across my desk under the warm desk lamp. Contracts, merger agreements, ownership certificates, voting rights, trust, structure, paperwork. Proof that everything I said in that ballroom was not emotion. It was fact. I ran my fingers over Richard Hayes's signature from 15 years ago. The ink slightly faded but still sharp enough to cut. The day he begged me to save Atlas. The day I became the invisible king. And that was when my phone buzzed. A call. Marcus, my lawyer, I answered. He didn't bother with greetings. I saw the news, he said. Or rather, I heard the whispers. You finally pulled the trigger. I stared at the documents, the proof of my power lying on the desk, like a weapon that didn't need to be raised to kill. Yes, I said. I'm done hiding. Marcus exhaled slowly. If you do this, he said, you're not just embarrassing a few executives. You're starting a war. I looked at the papers again. Then I said the words that would change everything. Good, I replied, because I'm ready to win. By the time the sun rose, The machine was already in motion. I hadn't slept. Not because I was anxious, but because clarity has a way of sharpening the mind until rest feels unnecessary. I sat at my desk as the city woke up outside my window, documents spread out like a map of a territory I was finally ready to reclaim. Marcus worked fast. Too fast for someone who thought this was just a bruised ego. By 8 in the morning, my inbox was full. Executive compensation summaries, vendor contracts, expense accounts, internal emails flagged with quiet warnings from people who had waited years for someone to actually look. Atlas Dynamics wasn't a huskum plazent. It was routine. I leaned back in my chair as I scrolled. Luxuried retreats billed as client meetings. Private flights disguised as operational travel. Contracts routed to cousins, brothers-in-law, college friends. And at the center of it all was Richard Hayes, the CEO who laughed politely while his executives humiliated the man who owned the company. The irony almost made me smile. Almost. Marcus called again. "I'm sending formal audit notices to the board," he said. "Full financial and ethical review. No soft language. No favors." "Good," I replied. "Schedule an emergency board meeting as soon as legally possible." He hesitated. "You understand what this does, right?" he asked. "Once that meeting happens, there's no pretending anymore. Your name becomes public. Your role becomes undeniable." I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. For years, I had chosen invisibility because it was comfortable. Now I chose visibility because it was necessary. "Let them know," I said. The first crack appeared before noon. Chad Wilson, the golden boy. The man who laughed the loudest. HR called him in for a conduct review related to behavior at corporate events. Official language. Unofficial message. You are no longer protected. By 1 in the afternoon, Richard was panicking. He sent an email so carefully worded, it might as well have been written by a crisis team. "Jack, I think there may have been a misunderstanding last night. I'd love to discuss this privately and clear the air. No need to involve the board over something that can be resolved amicably." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Marcus. My reply was short. "There is no misunderstanding. The board meeting proceeds as scheduled. No signature, no emotion, just authority." That was when the whispers became screams. Employees noticed. People always do. The company Slack channels slowed. 10 exploded. Executives closed doors. Assistants whispered. Security walked a little straighter. Power has a smell when it shifts. And everyone could smell it. My phone buzzed again. "Emily, everything is chaos here." Chad got escorted out of the building. "People are saying the board is investigating Richard. Do you know what's happening?" I read the message. Typed, "This is what accountability looks like." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then another message, "Please call me." I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because she was finally experiencing what it felt like to be in the dark, and sometimes that lesson can't be taught with words. By late afternoon, Marcus had uncovered more than enough to justify scorched earth. Richard Hayes approved bonuses that would infuriate shareholders, buried complaints, and ignored ethics reports. Protected Chad not because he was valuable, but because he was loyal. And loyalty, in corrupt systems, always matters more than competence. Marcus's voice was calm when he called. "You're clear to act," he said. "Legally, ethically, financially, the board cannot stop you." I closed my eyes for a second, not from doubt, but from relief. "Good," I said. Tomorrow, I walk in. The next morning, I dressed like a man stepping into his own shadow. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no flashy watch. No unnecessary statements. Power doesn't need decoration. Emily was already gone when I came downstairs. She hadn't slept either. I knew because the house carried that heavy silence people leave behind when they re-afraid to speak. As I drove toward Atlas Dynamics headquarters, I passed the same skyline I'd passed 100 times before. But today, it felt different. Like it was mine again. Marcus met me in the underground garage. He handed me a slim briefcase. "Everything you need," he said. "Ownership confirmations, voting authority, removal notices." "You ready?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I've been ready since last night," I replied. They just didn't know it yet. The elevator ride up felt longer than it was. Each floor ticked past like a countdown. When the doors opened to the executive level, silence greeted me. People knew. Richard Hayes stood outside the boardroom, pale, sweating through his expensive suit. He forced a smile when he saw me. "Jack," he said, extending his hand. "This doesn't have to be I didn't take his hand. "This isn't adversarial," I said calmly. "It's corrective." His hand dropped. We walked into the boardroom together. 5 board members sat around the table. Confused, annoyed, unprepared. They expected lawyers. Maybe auditors. They didn't expect me. I took the seat at the head of the table without asking. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Jack Morgan." Recognition rippled slowly. Patricia Hensley narrowed her eyes. "Jack Morgan, from Orion Systems." "The same," I said. Richard swallowed. I opened the briefcase and spread the documents across the table. No speeches. No theatrics. Just facts. Executive compensation summaries. Conflict of interest disclosures. Audit triggers. I watched their faces change as they realized the scope. "This is serious, Patricia Said." "Yes," I replied, "and overdue." Richard cleared his throat. "I believe we can resolve this internally." "No," I interrupted, without raising my voice. "You can't." I slid a single document toward him. "Effective immediately," I said. "I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder. I am assuming direct oversight of Atlas Dynamics." The room froze. Richard stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. "You're resigning today," I continued. "Security will escort you out by end of business." A board member gasped, while another shifted in their seat. "But that's not all," I added. "This company will be restructured. Executives under investigation will be terminations will follow." Richard's voice cracked. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "And I am." I stood. "For 15 years, this company survived because I chose not to interfere. That courtesy is over." Silence. Heavy air. Absolute. Then Patricia nodded. "The motion stands," she said quietly. One by one, hands went up. It was unanimous. Richard Hayes's empire collapsed, without a single raised voice. As security stepped in, Richard looked at me with something like disbelief. "You stayed quiet all this time," he whispered. I met his eyes. "Silence isn't weakness," I said. "It's patience." He was shown the door. Just like Chad, just like every man who thought power belonged to titles instead of ownership. As the boardroom emptied, I sent one final message. To Samantha Brooks. The vice president, everyone ignored. "Get ready. A call is coming your way. Answer it." Samantha Brooks answered the call on the second ring. Her voice was cautious, professional, the tone of someone used to being careful with every word. "This is Samantha," she said. "Samantha," I replied. "This is Jack Morgan." A pause, then a breath. "The Jack Morgan?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The one who just removed Richard Hayes from the building." Silence. Again. I could almost hear her processing it. The mental math, the years of being overlooked, suddenly rearranging themselves into a new picture. "I need you in the boardroom," I continued. Now, when Samantha walked in 20 minutes later, she looked exactly like someone who hadn't expected her life to change that day. No tailored suit, no para-heels khakis and company polo. Hair pulled back hastily, but her eyes were sharp. Focused, hungry in the way only people who have been ignored too long can be. The remaining board members watched her enter with thinly veiled confusion. I stood, "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "this is Samantha Brooks, Vice President of Engineering, the person responsible for 3 of the company's most profitable product launches over the past 7 years." Murmurs, I continued. She did it without executive backing, without favoritism, without cutting ethical corners, while others took credit. Samantha swallowed. "I am formally nominating Samantha Brooks as the next CEO of Atlas Dynamics." The room went dead. Robert Chin scoffed openly. "She's never been an executive at that level," he said. "This is reckless." I turned to him slowly. "No," I replied. What was reckless was letting this company rot under men who mistook loyalty for leadership. Patricia leaned forward. "Why her?" she asked. "Because she knows the work," I said. "Because she's never needed a spotlight to perform. And because she hasn't been compromised." Samantha's hands trembled slightly. "I don't," she started. "You do," I said gently. "And you will." The vote followed. 1-5-1. Una imos. When it was done, Samantha stood frozen, eyes glassy. "I won't let you down," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "That's why I chose you." The transformation didn't take months. It took hours. Executive offices were locked, security badges deactivated, audit teams deployed. Emails sent. The culture that had relied on intimidation and entitlement collapsed like a house built on rot. By the time I left the building that afternoon, Atlas Dynamics was no longer the company Emily thought she worked for. It was mine again. I walked past her office without stopping. She was standing, watching. Her face was pale, unreadable. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I kept walking. At home, the confrontation came fast. Emily didn't even let me close the door. "You humiliated me," she said, voice shaking, mascara streaked beneath her eyes. I set my keys down slowly. "Which part humiliated you?" I asked calmly. "The truth, or the fact that you didn't know it?" She recoiled. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You lied to me for years." "No," I said. I stayed quiet. "You assumed." She turned away, pacing. "Everyone at work thinks I'm a fool," she said. "They think I married a stranger." "You laughed when they called me a loser," I replied evenly. "That didn't seem to bother you. See? Stop it." Her shoulders sagged. "I didn't think it mattered," she whispered. "That," I said softly, "is the problem." She faced me then, eyes red. "I thought I was carrying us," she admitted. "I thought you needed me." I nodded. "And I'll let you believe that," I said, "because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing." Her breath caught. "And what did you learn?" "Se asked." I looked at her for a long moment. "That you loved the version of me that made you feel powerful," I said, "but not the one that needed respect." Silence filled the room. Heavy, unavoidable. In the days that followed, Atlas Dynamics became unrecognizable. Samantha dismantled departments that existed only to protect egos, promoted people who had been invisible, instituted transparency where secrecy once ruled. Employees began speaking again, laughing again, working with purpose, and every time I walked the halls, heads lifted. Not in fear, in acknowledgement. 3 months later, we were back at the same ballroom. Same chandeliers, same polished marble. Different reality. This time, when my name was announced, the applause wasn't polite. It was real. Emily sat quietly in the 3rd row. No emerald dress, no power posture. Just a woman finally seeing the man she married. When I spoke, I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about integrity, about silence mistaken for weakness, about the danger of underestimating the quiet ones. As I stepped down from the stage, our eyes met. There was regret there, and something else. Respect, but respect, I had learned, comes too late when it has to be earned back. When the applause faded and the lights dimmed, something unexpected happened. The noise faded away, and in that quiet moment, I learned something power can't teach. Winning doesn't heal everything. It only reveals what's still broken. After the gala, I didn't head home right away. I just drove. No destination in mind, just. The city lights blurred past my windshield like memories I couldn't outrun. For 15 years, I had built my life around staying small so others could feel big. I convinced myself it was all about humility, love, and sacrifice. But the truth was harder to admit. I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped hiding. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. Because once people finally see who you are, you can never go back to being invisible. And invisibility, as painful as it was, had been comfortable. Emily didn't come home until dawn. When she finally did, she was silent, just leaving her heels by the door, sat across from me at the kitchen table. For the first time in ages, it was just real. No show, no gloss, just pure honesty. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," she said quietly. "That makes two of us," I replied. She stared at her hands. I loved being admired. She admitted being the one people looked up to. "And somewhere along the way, I started needing you to stay beneath me so I could keep that feeling." The words stung, but honestly, they didn't shock me. I never wanted admiration. I just wanted a partner. Tears slipped down her face. "I don't know if I know how to give that anymore." That was the moment everything became clear. Power hadn't broken us. Exposure had, because love built on assumptions collapses when the truth shows up uninvited. We tried counseling, long conversations, painful silences, but some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Emily had fallen in love with a version of me that didn't fully exist, and I had fallen in love with who I hoped she would be when tested. Neither of us was the villain, but neither of us was innocent. 6 months later, we signed the papers. No screaming, no drama, just two people accepting that respect elate is often respect denied. Atlas Dynamics thrived. Under Samantha's leadership, the company doubled its innovation output. Employee retention skyrocketed. The culture became something people were proud of. I stepped back again, not into the shadows this time, but into alignment. I no longer hid, and I no longer needed to prove. Occasionally, I'd overhear whispers, "That's him. The owner, the guy who turned everything around." But none of it mattered the way it once did, because the real victory wasn't humiliating the men who mocked me. It wasn't reclaiming a title. It was reclaiming my voice. Here's the truth. No one tells you. People will treat you based on the story you allow them to believe, and the moment you stop correcting them, that story becomes your prison. I thought staying quiet made me noble. It didn't. It made me invisible. So, if you're watching this and you feel overlooked, if you've been underestimated, if you've been laughed at by people who never bothered to know you, hear this clearly. You don't need to explode. You don't need revenge. But you do need to stop shrinking, because the most dangerous moment for anyone who underestimates you is the day you decide you're done hiding. If this story hits something deep inside you, subscribe. Not for me. For you. Because stories like this aren't entertainment. They're mirrors. And once you see yourself clearly, you don't go back. And if you're ready for the next story, the one that reminds you who you really are when the world forgets, it's waiting for you right here.